Hello, my name's Ben.
And my name's Josh.
Welcome back to FPL Graduates and welcome back to another video. Today's video, of course, we're sort of looking ahead now to Game Week 28. We thought that we had a weekend of FPL carnage sort of not happening. The FA Cup has thrown up all sorts, which is fantastic for the engaged managers. And hopefully we can take advantage by going into some of these transfer targets ahead of Game Week 28.
Yeah, an absolute car crash weekend. I think that's such a good way to put it from Ben there. So many injuries, suspensions, just all sorts of things going on. So we're going to break down a couple of players in each position. This transfer target is probably not as lengthy as usual, mainly because one, there's not as many options at the moment with the amount of suspensions and injuries going around. But two, we've also covered off a lot of players in last week's episode. So if you haven't checked that out, I definitely recommend going and checking that out. And then obviously next week it's going to be a little bit more different with the focus of the blank game week in mind. So yeah, if there's obviously more players and different scenarios, do drop them in the comments down below as we reply to every single one of you. We're going to start off obviously with defenders with Ryan Aït-Nouri, as you can see on screen. If you're looking for a defensive asset, arguably for any price point, I think he is number one or two for me. Everton at home, Southampton away in the blank, and then West Ham at home. Wolves' fixtures for the long term right now are probably some of the best in the league until nearly the end of the season. So yeah, you can look at a decent attacking wing back, and for me, Ben, I think it's going to be interesting to see where he operates. Obviously, with the suspension of Cunha, Wolves obviously have injuries to the likes of Guedes and Hwang Hee-chan. And the last time we sort of saw an injury crisis at Wolves, Aït-Nouri did play further forward, obviously, albeit under a different manager. What's your thoughts on that, Ben, and on him potentially playing forward and also him as an asset in general?
Yeah, we've just got to sort of keep an eye on it and sort of have a look and see what happens with that, to be honest. Ryan Aït-Nouri is going to be a good asset regardless of who's injured and who's not in the team. Of course, it dents the overall attacking appeal for Wolves with Cunha, etc., being out. But for Ryan Aït-Nouri's case, it's not the worst thing in the world anyway. We don't expect too many sort of attacking returns on a regular basis, but we know there's the explosivity there with him as an asset. So yeah, be keen to sort of see how they get on over the next couple of game weeks. And of course, sort of an ideal candidate for the next two game weeks in particular. Okay, so next up, we're going to talk about Levi Colwill of Chelsea. Of course, off the back of a pretty good haul in the last game week, which was fantastic. Yeah, the minute security is there for Levi Colwill. The fixtures aren't great after Leicester. For me, I think, if you were going to commit on transferring in Levi Colwill, you probably would have done this last week with the two really tasty fixtures that Chelsea had, both at home. But yeah, I don't think you would have sort of missed the boat entirely if you hop on him for the Leicester game. But of course, then you'd have to sort of be willing to have a strong enough bench, to bench him potentially for that Tottenham game after. You'd probably be looking at playing him in 29 if you're transferring him in. Arsenal away is not the most ideal fixtures, but given Arsenal's attacking problems that they're going forwards, I do see a bit of a cagey affair with that. Arsenal can't afford to lose any more games for the rest of the season, really. So I think that, the Chelsea clean sheet could be there and available for potential. And at 4.4 million, Colwill does provide really good value for those managers on a budget as well.
Yeah, definitely agree with this one. I think for me personally, I own Colwill, had him for that haul last week. I've had him for a seriously long period of time, so I felt like the returns were just. Leicester at home is obviously fantastic. Leicester have failed to score in a numerous amount of games. I think it's like 7 in their last 10 they've failed to score. Don't quote me on that, but it's definitely been a few. So yeah, for me, that's obviously a great fixture. I wouldn't be really worried about that Arsenal fixture for me personally. Just seeing how they are at the moment without the attackers they have on offer. I think it's a fine fixture to play a defender in at the moment. Really sort of lackluster. We saw that against Forest. And even Nuno coming out and saying you just don't need that as many defenders against them at the moment because they don't have enough attacking options. So yeah, for me, I'd happily play him in the next two. It's a really nice option and quite differential if you're looking at maybe a wild card in Game Week 30, Game Week 31. Okay, so on to the midfielders then. We've got a couple of options on here. First up, we're going with Antoine Semenyo, and we'll talk about the Bournemouth midfielders in general when talking about him at the moment. Obviously, we saw Dango Ouattara not start in the FA Cup game against Wolves. He did come on, obviously converted that cheeky little penalty in the shootout, which was good to see. For me at the moment, though, he's a big minutes risk heading into that blank game week in 29. Obviously, we haven't seen necessarily Evan Nilsson come back into the team in the Premier League yet, but it gave us a good sort of inkling. Justin Kluivert as well was benched for that game. Obviously, Kluivert, we'd assume, is a talismanic figure for Bournemouth. From my sort of understanding, I guess you could say, I just feel like Bournemouth are sort of returning to how they were pre-injury crisis, where Kluivert wasn't a 90-minute man. Obviously, Atara was a fringe squad player, and they've just got a few more options back now, so they can rotate these guys in and out, which obviously does mean less minutes for players that previously we thought were 90-minute men. Semenyo, though, is a 90-minute man regardless of the injuries. So for me at the moment, I think he's probably the safest asset that you could go with Bournemouth in terms of the minutes. I do still think Justin Kluivert will start pretty much all the games. I don't have a question about that. What's your thoughts on Semenyo, Ben, and how do you see that Bournemouth midfielder conundrum at the moment?
Yeah, I think I agree. I think that Semenyo is probably the best option out of the lot. Of course, we're not going to know sort of the true thoughts of Iraola until we see that team in Gameweek 28 against Tottenham away. So it's one that we'll just have to bear in mind. And I think if you're making any moves early ahead of 29, then Semenyo is probably the safe one to go for in terms of Bournemouth midfielders. I would hold off if you can as best as possible making transfers this week in terms of the Bournemouth midfielders anyway, so we can sort of get a bit more information on who is preferred, because that's going to be key. We haven't seen like the most sort of rotation from Bournemouth so far this season, especially in Premier League matches anyway. So we will get a better indication in 28 to know in 29 who is going to be the standout midfielder for Bournemouth. Okay, so next up, we're going to talk about Jeremy Doku of Manchester City. Manchester City look to be starting to turn a corner, in my opinion, in terms of their performances, especially going forwards. Defensively, still not the greatest in terms of their defence. Of course, they conceded to Plymouth at the weekend, which doesn't help their case at all. But Doku looks to be an interesting asset. The City assets in general seem to be quite interesting because they are priced quite cheaply. They've got, that threat of rotation of minutes, but the fixture against Brighton at home is one of the better ones of the fixture you could look at. And then, of course, in game week 30, the fixture against Leicester is really good as well. So there is high potential over those 2 game weeks in particular for a haul to come from any of these Manchester City men. So Doku is definitely one of interest. And then I think you can almost sort of tag in Savinho as well as a player of interest. For me, Savinho, of course, has a lot more assist potential than goal threat, just from the base of how wide he does end up playing for Manchester City. He likes cutting in, and the big chance involvement maybe a little bit better as well than Doku. Josh, what's your overall thoughts on Doku and the potential of Savinho as well?
Yeah, I think both options are actually really interesting because a lot of managers will be looking to maybe fund a way to get Haaland into their team, especially for 29 and 30. And I think a way to sort of double down on that as well is to get a City midfielder in there too. Like you mentioned, obviously Savinho data-wise looks much better on those sort of stats on the right-hand side. What I will say though is that Doku does create good chances and quite a lot of them, to be honest. I thought against Spurs in the most recent fixture for them, he looked really, really dangerous. And obviously both Doku and Savinho were rested in that Plymouth game at the weekend. So you'd expect to start against Forest away if you were needing them in the immediate future. I think for me, if I was choosing one or the other, I probably would just edge it Savinho, but obviously both at the same price. I think both on their day could haul pretty easily as well. We've seen it with Jeremy Doku in the past. He's had a hat trick. Like, he can easily get double digit hauls. I think the same sort of leans towards Savinho. He gets enough chances to do that. I would say he's probably quite wasteful in front of goal. Obviously, only the 1 goal so far for Manchester City. But the assist threat with him is really high. 10 assists already in his debut season is nothing to be sniffed at. Okay, then, so we're going to make it a hat trick as well. And we're going to talk about Omar Marmoush, obviously in the forward category, so slightly different from Doku and Savinho. 7.2 million. Obviously, the data sample is extremely small, so take that with a pinch of salt on the right-hand side. I wouldn't be looking too much into it. Obviously, with the injuries to Mateta, suspension to Cunha, it offers open a lot more forward slots than what we previously thought that we would have available for this game week. Chris Wood is another option that obviously won't be on our list this week due to the fixture, but he's someone else to consider too. Marmoush, for me, I'm not too sold on him. I think he is a good player, but from an FPL perspective, I'm just not so sold on him at the moment. I personally would rather make the saving of $1 million to go down to one of the midfielders What's your thoughts on him, Ben? Can you shine any more brighter light on him than I can?
Yeah, I think despite sort of us getting the injuries in the striker's position, I think there are still sort of three better strikers in terms of value in that position. Just given the threat of rotation with Marmoush, I don't think you can really afford, if you're looking to transfer him in, to go with him for that sort of basis. But yeah, I think the midfielders hold a little bit better value because you can get more of them in your team. But then on that flip side, if you are looking for an asset who has potentially quite a high ceiling, Marmoush is going to be that guy, and that's going to be the risk pick this week. So it's all about balancing that risk. And if you think he gets, the 70 minutes plus against Brighton, then definitely one to consider. But for me at the moment, I'm personally not going to be looking towards that move. And then up top as well, we've got the man in form at the moment is Beto of Everton. The two fixtures coming up for the Toffees for the next two look very good, especially over the blank game week. West Ham at home is not a bad fixture at all. Of course, he is overperforming in terms of his data at the moment, but it's not to such a high extent that we're panicking about it. He seems to be getting chances every game, which is good for the stats. And of course, should be fairly assured in its minutes as well. Josh, at 5 million, he's very cheap. Is he worth sort of investing in with that low risk?
Yeah, if you need someone around this price, or some way to fund a move elsewhere, I wouldn't even consider it twice. Like the data that he's shown in that small sample size of 750 minutes, 12 big chance involvements, those being pretty much all goal involvements as well, not assist involvements. I think it's a no-brainer at his price tag. He's on penalties as well, which is a fantastic benefit at such a low price point of £5 million. Wolves away, I think, is a good fixture to attack. I don't see any issue there. West Ham, probably not as bad as they were. They are slightly stronger defensively, but certainly wouldn't be turned off playing attackers against them for sure. So yeah, like I say, if you need a way to fund a move elsewhere, he'd be someone who I'd definitely consider, especially for that blank game week in 29. Okay, then, so that wraps up our Game Week 28 transfer targets. Like I said, a little shorter one than usual. So if you have any questions about any particular assets, let us know in the comments and we will get back to you individually.
Yeah, absolutely. And as always, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe to the FPL graduates. I've been Ben.
I've been Josh.
And we'll see you guys
next time. Have a good game week, everyone.
So you may rise, but you'll never make me wanna stay.